The quiet seeker dropped out of hyperspace with a gentle shudder that ran through its metal bones. Navigator stretched her four arms and yawned, expecting nothing but empty space and boring sensor readings. This was the 37th system they had surveyed in the past 2 cycles, and every single one had been dead rock and frozen gas. She was tired. She was bored. She wanted to go home. But then her console began to beep. Leaned forward, her large silver eyes narrowing as she studied the data streaming across her screen. The third planet from the yellow star was showing strange readings. There were geometric patterns beneath the clouds, shapes too regular to be natural, metal signatures clustered in grid formations, and most strange of all, faint traces of artificial compounds in the atmosphere, the kind that only appeared when a civilization burned fuel and built machines. She called for Captain, her voice tight with excitement. The captain arrived on the bridge within minutes, his gray scales gleaming under the ship's cold lights. He was old for nearly 200 cycles, and he had seen many things in his long career. But when he looked at A's readings, his crest rose in surprise. "A dead civilization," he said quietly, "after all this time." The Galactic Consortium had searched for evidence of other intelligent life for thousands of cycles. They had found bacteria on frozen moons. They had found fossils of simple creatures in ancient stone. But they had never found proof that another species had built cities and dreamed of stars. The universe had seemed impossibly empty, as if the consortium's member species were alone in the vast dark. Until now. Captain ordered the ship to approach the planet. As they drew closer, the readings became clearer. There had been a civilization here, and it had been large. Massive structures rose from the surface, now crumbling and overgrown. Roads stretched across continents in faded lines. The ruins of what might have been spacecraft littered fields of strange crystalline growths. But there were no signals, no lights, no movement. Whatever had lived here was gone. The quiet seeker settled into orbit, and the crew gathered in the observation deck to stare down at the brown and gray world below. Chief pressed his wrinkled face against the viewport, his small eyes scanning the surface with hungry interest. "We must go down," he said. "We must see what they left behind." The landing team consisted of 12 crew members, including and a young security officer named who kept his weapon close at all times. They loaded into a shuttle and descended through thick clouds that smelled of poison and ash. When they broke through to the surface, they found themselves flying over a dead city. The buildings were tall and strange, reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for something they could never touch. Many had collapsed, their metal frames twisted and broken. Vegetation had claimed the streets, thick vines and gray plants growing over everything. The air was bad, filled with chemicals that made the cough even through their breathing masks. They landed in what had once been a large open area, perhaps a gathering place or a market. Stepped out first, his boots crunching on broken stone. He knelt down and picked up a piece of debris, turning it over in his hands. "Look at this," he said softly. "Look at the craftsmanship. These people were not primitive." Over the next several hours, the team explored the ruined city. They found homes filled with rotting furniture and personal items. They found what appeared to be schools, with small desks arranged in rows. They found hospitals and libraries and places of worship, all silent, all empty, all slowly being consumed by time and nature. But it was the underground structures that truly amazed them. Beneath the city, the builders had carved vast bunkers into the rock. These chambers were enormous, stretching down for hundreds of levels. And unlike the surface ruins, many of these underground spaces were still intact, protected from the harsh weather above. Led the team deeper and deeper, his excitement growing with each new discovery. The walls were covered in writing and symbols, a language no one could read. There were rooms filled with machines of unknown purpose. There were storage areas packed with containers, sealed tight against the ages. And everywhere there were attempts at preservation. They knew, said as they stood in a vast library filled with data crystals. They knew they were dying, and they tried to save what they could. The crystals contained information, that much was clear, but the team had no way to read them yet. That would require time and effort back on the ship with proper translation equipment. For now, all they could do was document and explore. It was who found the power signature. The young security officer had been scanning the lower levels when his equipment detected something unexpected. There was energy flowing through the rock, faint but steady, coming from somewhere far below. He reported his findings too, and the old's eyes went wide. That should not be possible, said. This civilization has been dead for centuries. What could still be running? They followed the power signature down through tunnels that grew older and more carefully constructed the deeper they went. The air grew warmer. The lights on their equipment flickered and danced, and then they came to a door. It was massive, made of metal that still shone despite the passage of time. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, and a small panel beside it glowed with soft blue light. The door was sealed, but it was not dead. Power flowed through it, waiting. I stepped forward and touched the panel. Nothing happened at first. Then, slowly, the symbols on the door began to shift and change. The metal groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling as ancient mechanisms stirred to life. The door opened. Beyond it was a chamber that took their breath away. It was circular, with smooth white walls that curved up to a domed ceiling. In the center of the room stood a single large cylinder made of glass and metal, connected to the floor by a tangle of pipes and wires. Frost covered its surface, and cold mist drifted from vents at its base. But that was not what made the team freeze in shock. Inside the cylinder, visible through the foggy glass, was a figure. It was roughly humanoid in shape, with 2 arms and 2 legs and a head with features that might have been a face. It was thin and pale, almost fragile-looking, and it was alive. The readouts on the cylinder's surface told the story. Life signs stable, core temperature maintained, cryogenic suspension active. The numbers had been counting for a very long time. 817 years. Approached the cylinder slowly, as if he were afraid it might vanish if he moved too quickly. He pressed his face close to the glass, trying to see the figure within more clearly. The being appeared to be sleeping, its chest rising and falling in a rhythm so slow it was almost invisible. "This is impossible," whispered. "How could anything survive this long? What kind of technology could keep a living creature frozen for 8 centuries? I checked the power systems and found the answer. A geothermal tap, buried deep in the planet's crust, had been feeding energy to this chamber since before the consortium even existed. The builders had created a system that could run forever, or at least long enough for someone to find it. They planned this, she said. They wanted someone to find this place. They wanted someone to find them. Had his weapon raised, his young face tight with fear. We should seal this room and report back to the captain. We do not know what this creature is. It could be dangerous. But even as he spoke, something changed. The frost on the glass began to thin. The mist around the cylinder grew thicker, warmer. The ancient machines hummed louder, their rhythms shifting from sleep to waking. And inside the cylinder, the figure moved. First, just a twitch of the fingers, then a slow turn of the head. Then, with a movement that seemed to take enormous effort, the being's eyes opened. They were strange eyes, dark and deep, filled with something that might have been intelligence or might have been madness. They focused on the glass, on the shapes beyond it, on the aliens who had stumbled into this tomb and disturbed its only resident. The team stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, as the last survivor of a dead civilization looked upon them for the first time. The cylinder hissed. Steam poured from its seams. The glass panel at the front began to slide away, and a pale hand reached out into the cold air of the chamber. The being opened its mouth and made a sound, a word in a language none of them understood. Its voice was rough from centuries of sleep, cracking, and weak, but there was strength behind it. There was purpose. Stepped back, his heart's pounding in his chest. In all his years of studying dead civilizations, he had never imagined he would meet a living member of one. He had no protocols for this. He had no training. All he had was the sudden, overwhelming weight of history pressing down on him. "Contact the ship," he said quietly. "Tell Captain we have found something extraordinary. Tell him we have found a survivor." The being stepped fully out of the cylinder and stood on unsteady legs, looking around the chamber at the aliens who had awakened it. There was no fear in its eyes. There was only patience, as if it had been waiting for this moment for a very long time, which they would soon learn it had. The being's name was Myra. It took 3 days for the translation systems to build a working bridge between their language and hers. 3 days of careful study, of recorded sounds and written symbols, of Myra pointing at objects and speaking words that the machine slowly learned to understand. She was patient through all of it, never showing frustration, never demanding anything. She simply waited, as she had waited for so many years already. When communication finally became possible, Captain himself came down to the bunker to speak with her. He brought Anna with him, along with a small team of medical officers who wanted to understand how this creature had survived for so long. They gathered in the chamber where Myra had slept, sitting on crates of ancient equipment while she perched on the edge of her cylinder like it was a familiar chair. She was smaller than they had expected, barely reaching the chest of the average. Her skin was pale from centuries without sunlight, and her hair was long and gray, hanging down her back in tangled waves. But her eyes were sharp, and her voice, when she spoke through the translator, was steady and clear. "You are the first," she said. "I was beginning to think no one would ever come." Captain leaned forward, his scales catching the dim light. "We have many questions. Your civilization, your people, what happened to them? How did you survive when everything else died?" Myra was quiet for a long moment. When she answered, her voice was soft with old grief. "We killed ourselves, slowly over many generations. We poisoned our air and our water. We fought wars over resources that were running out. We knew what was happening. We could see the end coming. But we could not stop. We were too many and too afraid and too stubborn to change." She stood and walked to the wall where a large screen flickered to life at her touch. Images appeared, scenes of a world that no longer existed, cities gleaming in sunlight, forests stretching to the horizon, oceans blue and full of life. "This was our world," she said. "This was Earth, and we destroyed it." The images changed, showing the slow decay. Skis turning brown, waters rising and then falling as they boiled away, cities crumbling as their inhabitants fled or died. It was a history written in disaster, each chapter worse than the last. When we finally understood that we could not save ourselves, we decided to save something else. Myra turned to face them, her expression calm. "We would save our memory, our knowledge, our story, so that even if we disappeared, the universe would know that we existed." The archive said, "The data crystals we found." Yes, everything we were, everything we knew, everything we dreamed and feared and loved, it is all stored here. Our science and our art, our history and our myths, the best of us and the worst of us, because we did not want to lie. We wanted whoever found us to understand the truth. Captain shook his head in wonder. "But why you? Why did you stay behind?" Myra smiled, and it was a sad smile full of ancient loss. Someone had to keep the lights on. Someone had to make sure the systems kept running, that the archive remained safe. We called ourselves the Keepers. There were 12 of us at the beginning, volunteers who agreed to be changed, modified, made to live longer than any human was meant to live. "How long?" I asked. "I have been awake for approximately 30 years of my life. The rest I spent in sleep, waking every few decades to check the systems and make repairs. The others did the same, but one by one they failed. System malfunctions, accidents. Some simply gave up. They could not bear the loneliness. She looked down at her hands, thin and lined with age. I am the last. I have been alone for 300 years. The weight of that number hung in the air. 300 years of solitude, of waking to an empty world, of knowing that everyone she had ever loved was dust. They could not imagine such a burden. Why did you not try to save your people? Asked gently. All this effort, all this sacrifice, why preserve memories instead of lives? We tried, Myra said. We sent ships to other stars, colonies of survivors who hoped to start again. We built seed vaults and genetic banks. We launched probes carrying instructions for how to rebuild our species from scratch. But space is vast, and our technology was limited. We had no way of knowing if any of it would work, so we prepared for the possibility that it would not. She touched the screen again and new images appeared. Ships launching from a dying world. Faces filled with hope and terror. Messages of farewell sent into the darkness. We did everything we could think of, and then we waited, and no one ever came back. No signals, no messages, nothing. Myra turned to face the captain directly, and there was something desperate in her eyes now, something that had been buried for centuries. Did any of them make it? She asked. In all your travels, in all your records, have you ever encountered humans? Did anyone survive out there? Captain looked at, then at a. They all knew the answer, and none of them wanted to say it. We do not know, finally admitted. The Galactic Consortium is vast, but we have only explored a small portion of the galaxy. Your colony ships could be anywhere. They could still be traveling, or they could have settled worlds we have never visited. Or they could be dead, Myra said quietly, like everything else. It is possible. We have no records of any species matching your description, but that does not mean they are gone, only that we have not found them yet. Myra nodded slowly. She had expected this answer, that much was clear. She had prepared herself for it long ago, but some small part of her had still hoped, and watching that hope fade was painful to witness. Then the archive is all that remains, she said. The memory of a species that reached for the stars and fell short. I have kept it safe for 800 years. I always believed someone would come eventually. The universe is too big and too old for us to have been truly alone. She looked at them with something like gratitude. And now you are here, you found us. You will know that we existed. We will do more than that, said firmly. We will study your archive. We will translate your records. We will learn everything your people knew, and we will share it with the consortium. Your species will not be forgotten, Myra. I promise you that. Myra smiled again, and this time there was warmth in it. Thank you. That is all I ever wanted. The medical team approached, wanting to examine her, to understand how her modified body worked. Myra allowed it, answering their questions patiently, explaining the genetic changes that had been made to her cells, the nanomachines that repaired damage while she slept, the drugs that slowed her aging to a crawl. We expected to last 1,000 years at most, she said as they scanned her with their strange instruments. The original plan was for the keepers to trade shifts, each of us sleeping for centuries while one stayed awake to watch. But things went wrong. They always go wrong. I have been alone much longer than I should have been. You should not have survived this long, one of the doctors said. Your cellular degradation is severe. By all rights, you should have died centuries ago. I know, Myra said simply, but I could not. Not until someone came, not until the archive was safe. She looked at Captain, and there was something in her eyes that he did not understand. Something ancient and fierce. I need to ask something of you, she said. I need to ask what you plan to do with what you have found here. Straightened, surprised by the question. We will report our discovery to the Consortium Council. They will send research teams, historians, scientists. Your archive will be studied and preserved. Your technology will be analyzed. And what will happen to me? The captain hesitated. He had not thought that far ahead. You are the only member of your species we have ever encountered. You are perhaps the most important archaeological find in the history of the consortium. I imagine they will want to study you as well." "I am not an artifact," Myra said quietly. "I am the last of my kind. I am not a thing to be studied. I am the keeper of my people's memory, and I have a responsibility to see that memory protected." There was no anger in her voice, only determination. Realize that this small, fragile creature had a will of iron, forged in centuries of solitude and loss. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want to come with you. I want to speak for my people. I want to make sure that whatever happens to the archive, it is treated with respect. And I want—" She paused, and for a moment she looked unbearably tired. "I want to see what else is out there. I have spent so long in this tomb. I want to see the stars before I die." Considered this for a long time. It was not his decision to make, not entirely. The council would have opinions. There would be debates and arguments and political complications. But looking at this small being, this last survivor of a lost civilization, he found that he could not refuse. "Very well," he said, "you will come with us, and I will make sure your voice is heard." Myra closed her eyes, and something in her seemed to relax, as if a weight she had carried for 800 years had finally been lifted. "Thank you," she whispered, "thank you." The consortium council chamber was vast and echoing, built to hold representatives from 1,000 worlds. Today, it held only a few hundred, hastily assembled to hear the report from the quiet seeker. But what they lacked in numbers, they made up for in intensity. The discovery of a dead civilization was monumental. The discovery of a living survivor was beyond anything they had imagined. Myra stood in the center of the chamber, dwarfed by the towering seats of the council members. She wore a simple gray robe that they had given her, and her long hair had been tied back from her face. She looked small and fragile, surrounded by so many alien beings, but her eyes were calm. Captain presented his report first, describing the discovery of the ruins, the exploration of the bunker, the awakening of the last keeper. He shared images of the archive, samples of data that had begun to translate. The council members leaned forward, their various eyes and sensors focused on the screens. When finished, the questions began. "What is the extent of this archive?" demanded a tall representative from the Chorus Collective. "How much technology does it contain?" "Considerable," replied. "Preliminary analysis suggests advanced knowledge of energy production, genetic modification, atmospheric engineering, and computational systems. Many of their discoveries appear to be novel, different from anything in consortium records." A murmur ran through the chamber. Novel technology was valuable beyond measure. Wars had been fought over less. "And this creature," said a floating sphere that represented the thoughtful ones, "this last survivor, what is its status? Is it a citizen, a refugee, a specimen?" Myra spoke before anyone could answer for her. Her voice, amplified by the translation systems, filled the chamber. "I am Myra, I am human. I am the last of my species, or perhaps not. We sent ships to the stars before the end, and we do not know their fate. I am the keeper of my people's memory, a duty I have held for 800 years. I am not a specimen. I am not a thing. I am here to speak for the dead." Silence followed her words. The council members exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to this small being who spoke with such authority. The speaker of the council, an ancient crystalline entity named Prism, spoke next. "We mean no disrespect, human. Your discovery is of immense importance to the consortium. We simply wish to understand the implications." "Then let me explain them," Myra said. "My people created the archive because we knew we were dying. We wanted to leave something behind, a record of everything we were, our science and our art, our triumphs and our failures, our hopes and our mistakes." She paused, looking around at the assembled aliens. "We made many mistakes. We destroyed our own world through greed and short-sightedness. We fought each other even as our extinction approached. We were flawed and foolish in countless ways. The archive does not hide this. It shows everything, the beautiful and the ugly alike, because we believed that truth was more valuable than comfort. Your technology, the representative pressed. Your weapons research, your genetic modifications, these could be dangerous in the wrong hands. Yes, Myra agreed. They could. We developed weapons that could destroy cities in an instant. We created diseases that killed millions. We built machines that could think faster than any living mind. All of this is in the archive because all of it is part of who we were. Another murmur, this time tinged with fear. The council members were beginning to understand what they had found, and some of them did not like it. Perhaps, said a serpentine being from the endless coil, this archive should be sealed, contained, studied only by trusted researchers under strict controls. The knowledge it contains could destabilize the consortium if released carelessly. Myra's expression did not change. You could do that. You could lock away everything my people created, bury it in some vault where it will never see light. You would not be the first to try to control dangerous knowledge. But, Prism prompted. But you would be wrong. Myra stepped forward, her small form suddenly commanding attention. My people did not preserve themselves so that they could be hidden away. They did not sacrifice everything so that their memory could be locked in a box and forgotten. They wanted to be known. They wanted their story to be heard. Even the dangerous parts, they asked. Especially the dangerous parts. Myra's voice was fierce now, burning with conviction. Do you know why we fell? Because we refused to learn from our mistakes. We saw the disasters coming and convinced ourselves they would not happen. We ignored the warnings because they were inconvenient. We chose comfort over truth and it destroyed us. She pointed at the screens showing images of Earth's ruins. That is what happens when a civilization lies to itself, when it hides from ugly truths, when it pretends that everything will be fine if it just does not look too closely. My people learned that lesson too late, but you do not have to. Silence filled the chamber. The council members stared at this small, ancient being who spoke to them as if they were children who needed instruction. The archive is not just knowledge, Myra continued. It is a warning. It shows exactly how a civilization destroys itself, step by step, decision by decision. If you study it honestly, if you learn from our failures, you might avoid our fate, but only if you are willing to look at the truth, even when it is painful. Prism's crystalline form pulsed with color, a sign of deep thought. You speak of warning, but you also spoke of hope. Your people sent ships to the stars. They tried to survive. Yes, Myra's voice softened. We never stopped hopping. Even at the end, even when everything was falling apart, we believed that someone might make it, that somewhere out there humanity might continue. That is also in the archive. Our dreams, not just our failures. Our love, not just our wars. Our songs and our stories and all the beautiful things we made. She looked around the chamber one more time. I am asking you to honor both, to learn from our darkness and be inspired by our light, to take our memory and carry it forward so that we did not die for nothing. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Representatives argued about security and access, about research protocols and political implications. Some wanted to seal the archive completely. Others wanted to exploit it for their own advantage. A few, moved by Myra's words, argued for open study and careful sharing. Through it all, Myra sat quietly, watching the aliens decide the fate of her people's legacy. She had said what she needed to say. The rest was beyond her control. It was deep into the night cycle when Prism finally called for order. The crystalline speaker had listened to every argument, considered every perspective. Now it was time for a decision. The council has heard the evidence and the arguments, Prism announced. We have debated the risks and the benefits, and we have listened to the keeper of the human archive, who has watched over her people's memory for 800 years. The chamber fell silent. It is the judgment of this council that the archive shall be preserved and studied, with appropriate safeguards for dangerous materials. But it shall not be hidden. The story of humanity, their achievements and their failures, their hopes and their warnings, shall be made available to all member species of the consortium, so that they may learn from what has been preserved. A wave of reaction swept through the chamber, some pleased, some angry, some uncertain. But Prism was not finished. Furthermore, the human Myra shall be granted status as a protected individual, with all the rights and freedoms that entails. She will serve as an advisor to the research teams studying the archive, and her voice will be heard in all decisions regarding its use. Myra stood, her ancient body trembling slightly with emotion. "Thank you," she said. "My people thank you." "There is one more matter," Prism continued. "The human-mentioned colony ships, sent to distant stars before the fall of their civilization. The Council hereby authorizes a search effort to determine the fate of these vessels. If any humans survived, if any descendants of the original colonists still exist somewhere in the galaxy, we will find them." Myra's eyes filled with tears for the first time since she had been awakened. The hope she had buried for 3 centuries came flooding back, overwhelming in its intensity. "You would do that," she whispered. "You have given us a gift beyond measure," Prism said. "The wisdom of a civilization that reached for the stars and fell. The least we can do is help you find out if any of your people caught them." The council session ended, and the representatives dispersed to their ships and worlds. News of the discovery spread quickly, carried by faster-than-light communications to every corner of the consortium. Within days, everyone knew about the dead civilization called humanity, and the last survivor who had waited 800 years for someone to hear her story. Myra stood at a viewport on the station orbiting the council world, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, maybe, were ships carrying the descendants of humanity. Or maybe there was nothing but cold metal and silent bones. She did not know. She might never know. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she had hope. Captain found her there, standing alone in the starlight. He joined her at the viewport, saying nothing for a long moment. "What will you do now?" he finally asked. Myra smiled. "I will tell my people's story. I will help the researchers understand the archive. I will answer their questions and share what I know, and I will wait." "Wait for what?" "For news of the colony ships, for proof that I am not the last, that somewhere out there, humanity continues." She turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I have waited 800 years. I can wait a little longer." Nodded slowly. "I hope you find them. I hope you are not alone." "So do I," Myra whispered. "So do I." Far across the galaxy, in a region of space that no consortium vessel had ever visited, a battered ship drifted through the void. Its hull was by centuries of micrometeorite impacts. Its engines had long since failed. Its crew had died and been succeeded by their children, who had died and been succeeded by their children, generation after generation. But the ship was not dead. Deep in its core, ancient systems still functioned, monitoring, waiting, hopping. When the broadcast reached it, Myra's story, carried across the stars by the consortium's network, alarms began to sound. Screens that had been dark for decades flickered to life. And in a cryogenic chamber much like the one where Myra had slept, 1,000 frozen figures began the slow process of waking. On the bridge, a single console lit up. A message appeared on its screen, simple and clear. "Signal received. Origin Earth Archive. Content human." A mechanical arm extended from the console and pressed a button. An antenna, frozen for generations, began to turn toward the source of the signal. And a reply began to transmit. Far away, in the Council's research station, Myra was asleep when the message arrived. It was garbled and weak, degraded by distance and time, but the communication officers recognized it immediately for what it was. A human language, a human voice, a human plea. We are here, we survived, we are coming home. Myra woke to the sound of alarms and running feet, burst into her quarters, his old face transformed by joy and disbelief. They found us, he said. Your people found us. They're alive, Myra, they're alive. She sat up slowly, her ancient heart pounding. What? The colony ships, one of them at least. They received the broadcast and sent a reply. They've been traveling for 800 years, but they survived. There are humans out there, thousands of them, and they're trying to come home. Myra stood on legs that suddenly felt weak. She walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars, the same stars she had stared at for 8 centuries, while she waited and hoped and refused to give up. They made it, she whispered. They actually made it. Behind her was saying something about coordinates and rescue missions and diplomatic protocols. She did not hear him. All she could hear was the echo of a promise made long ago, when a dying world sent its children into the darkness and prayed that somewhere, somehow, they would survive. Humanity was not gone. Humanity was coming home. And Myra, the last keeper, the guardian of memory, the woman who had waited alone through the long silence, Myra began to laugh and weep at the same time, overcome by a joy so vast it felt like it might tear her apart. We made it, she said to the stars, to the universe, to all the ghosts who had trusted her with their legacy. We actually made it. Somewhere in the vast darkness, a ship full of humans turned toward a signal from a world they had never seen, but had always remembered. And the universe, for the first time in 800 years, heard the sound of humanity coming home.